Jim Newton.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, September 8th, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Bonin, Englander, and Blumenfield, and we are ready to begin. If anybody would like to provide public comment, please fill out one of the white public comment cards and bring it forward, either about an agenda item or any matter within the jurisdiction of this committee. We'll be taking our closed session item. We only have one item number one for closed session today. We'll be taking that first. Is there anybody who has public comment on item number one? All right, seeing none, then comment on that item is closed. Members, I would like to, before we go into closed session, I'd like to propose items 4 and 6 as consent candidates, members. If items 4 and 6 as consent candidates, if we have no cards and if there are no issues among members.
And on item number 6, are you recommending to concur with the Transportation Committee's action?
Well, I'd be foolish to do otherwise since I'm sitting next to the chair of the T Committee.
And you're on the committee.
But yes, that would be my recommendation. And without objection, items 4 and 6 will be deemed approved on consent. And let's go ahead and proceed to the other room for item number 1. All right, thank you for your patience. We are back now in open session, and we'll proceed next to item number 2.
Item number 2 is the Department of General Services and Information Technology Agency joint report relative to the replacement of the city's purchasing system, the supply management system, including requests for an unappropriated balance appropriation, staffing needs, and approval of proposed contractual amendments. The Innovation, Technology, and General Services Committee approved as amended on August 4th, 2014, and the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee waived consideration of the matter.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ted Ross. I'm Assistant General Manager with the Information Technology Agency. I'm joined at the table with our key partners on this project, so I'd like to let them introduce themselves.
Debbie Ramos, Department of General Services. I'm the Assistant General Manager over Supply Services, including the system.
Todd Bowie, Director, City Controller's Office.
Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the Budget and Finance Committee, this report is a recommendation for the replacement of the city's supply management purchasing system, also known as SMS, using the purchasing module of the city's existing financial management system, also known as FMS. This report is a culmination of almost 1.5 years of cross-departmental research and analysis set in motion by the IT Oversight Committee and multiple reports to Council. I'd like to start off with just a little brief background. Folks who are in the know, like myself, work with the supply management system and some of the other city's various enterprise systems all the time. The supply management system is the city's purchasing system. In other words, it's the computer system that is used by all non-proprietary departments to purchase materials and supplies. Last fiscal year, this involved around 87,000 purchase orders, totaling $469 million. These purchases cover a wide variety of commodities, as you can imagine, such as office supplies and furniture, but they also involve critical supplies for core city operations, such as LAPD and fire department equipment, vehicles and protective gear, asphalt for potholes filled by street services, trash bins for residents, supplies for the repair and maintenance of city facilities, et cetera, as you can imagine. In a nutshell, SMS is a critical computer system for the city because it orders and pays for the supplies that we use every day for city service. What we face today, SMS was implemented back in 2001, and unfortunately it began experiencing issues back in 2005. It started with an upgrade in 2005 from PeopleSoft version 7.5 to version 8.8, and after that upgrade, the system and its interface with the city financials began experiencing substantial issues, both in its stability and its performance. The system lost functionality, multiple user workarounds were built in, and periodically system documents would hang in the system. In fact, in 2009, the city's external auditor, Simpson & Simpson, actually published serious findings and recommendations regarding the SMS system and the data that it was providing. As a result, General Services, the Controller, and ITA currently perform a daily, labor-intensive, manual reconciliation process to keep SMS in sync with the financial system. Last year, this amounted to over 13,300 hours of city staff time at an ongoing cost of $800,000 per year. The financial crisis of 2008 further exacerbated the issue with the SMS system. We had large losses of staff due to the early retirement incentive program. It contributed to a loss of staff knowledge. There were system outages. There was a heavy reliance on contractors as well as impacts to departmental operations. While city staff focused on keeping the system afloat, the SMS system fell gravely behind in maintenance and patches. So currently today we're over 40 patches behind, and the SMS system is no longer supported by the vendor. In other words, if this critical system breaks, the vendor will not be able to help. In other words, the SMS system is unsustainable, and it's in an unsustainable situation, and it poses a grave risk to the City of Los Angeles, our operations, and our constituent services. A common expression stated by the CAO's office and the CLA is, quote, the SMS replacement project is not a matter of if, but of when. As a result of this situation, in 2013, the Information Technology Oversight Committee, ITALC, chaired by Miguel Santana, at that time Jerry Miller, and the Mayor's Office, they asked for reports from General Services from ITA regarding the SMS system and the best long-term strategy. With reports in March, May, and September of 2013, the committee weighed the pros and cons of staying on the current path, upgrading the SMS system to its current version, or replacing the SMS system with the purchasing module of our recently implemented financial management system. Based on multiple compelling benefits, the committee recommended the freezing of the existing SMS system, as in no more enhancements and no more major changes, and a full replacement of SMS using the purchasing module of FMS. Page 3 and 4 in the report goes into a little more detail regards to some of the benefits, but at a high level, this approach would resolve the tremendous risk and issues we currently face with SMS. It would bring the city's financial and purchasing process into one real-time integrated system, which would have benefits in reduced hardware and software costs. It would increase user productivity and improve reporting. It would improve the vendor experience when doing business with the city. So, for example, it could speed up vendor payments through electronic payment processing, which is currently not available in SMS. It would allow reduced city payment processing costs, and it would also establish an online vendor portal. It would reform city purchasing processes and improve decision-making there, so it gives an opportunity for us to change key processes where we see delays. Also would reduce city risk and compliance with the audit findings. It allows for saving time and money. As we mentioned before, we're currently in a very labor-intensive manual reconciliation process to keep the SMS system working. That is to the tune of around $800,000 per year. In addition, Controller Ron Galpin published a memo on this topic stressing the importance of both procurement reform and that a requisite step would be the replacement of SMS. In September 2013, based on ITALC recommendations, our departments went to council with 2 separate contract amendments to start the design and analysis phase, also known as Envision Part 1 and Part 2. As a result of these phases, which were completed in August 2014, and I know I'm fast-forwarding a lot and going through thousands of hours of meetings and time and research and documentation, as a result, we identified 356 separate key city purchasing processes. We identified a very good fit between the FMS procurement module and the city's existing purchasing functions. We submitted budget packages to start the build phase. The total of those budget packages was $8.7 million for the first fiscal year. The project was allotted $4 million in the unappropriated balance, so we spent the last 2 to 3 months with a lot of time discussions with CAO, CLA, and others to identify the best move forward. The total project cost identified at $23.8 million over 4 fiscal years. It includes salary costs, equipment, and contingency in that value. We were recommended that the best way of approaching this multi-year, multi-million-dollar project would be to extend its go-live so as to minimize the year-to-year impact of the cost, and so we're looking at a July 2017 go-live. The recommendations are there listed in the report for what's being asked for, but I certainly want to be open. I know I had a lengthy introduction. I certainly want to be open for any questions in regards to this project or these recommendations.
All right. Ouch. Thank you. Why don't we start with the chair of the ITGS committee, Mr. Bloomfield?
Thank you. And we had a lengthy discussion about this in ITGS. I think it makes sense to move forward with this as we talked about it. And you know, the other piece I don't know if you mentioned is the timing issue and why moving forward now and quickly will save us some money. Maybe you want to explain that as well, because it's relevant to us in the budget committee.
Yes, absolutely. We've had considerable negotiations with the implementation partner, which is CGI, who's the maker of our existing financial management system. And so to the tune of a savings around $700,000, which would be 25% off any enhancements, so long as we were able to try to execute this within the month of September. So that was one of the reasons why we were pushing for a fast-paced discussion. And fast-paced being that we started the discussion a year and a half ago, but, you know, fast city pace, I guess.
I mean, I agree with what, you know, your testimony in terms of this isn't an if, or, you know, this is a when. We've got to do it. Doing it now, and that's why it was waived out of pause, is because the timing issue can save us a considerable amount of money. And it's not necessarily a sexy thing for the city in terms of a new shiny object. It's going to be expensive, but it will make the city function better, and it's something that we need just to function as a basic entity at this point. So I would strongly urge the recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Englander?
Fair.
Okay. Go right ahead then.
This has obviously been going on for many years, and I anticipate it'll continue to. And while these are critically important systems for not only tracking all of our procurement and goods and services, but also give general managers and the city ability to ensure that we're creating these efficiencies, that they can track all the acquisitions and millions and billions of dollars, actually, taxpayer dollars spent. And there's no off-the-shelf system that will model to the city, clearly.
Nothing right out of the box.
No, not so much. So with that, if you can talk a little bit about how this could also be used and what's the objective for some of our performance metrics. There's a lot of talk and conversation about how general managers are actually going to be monitoring and being able to pull reports. And are they actually going through that kind of training? I mean, I know they're all incredibly busy, and the answer often comes back from them. Well, yeah, we may have had the capabilities, but we're understaffed, and we don't have the personnel that have been trained properly to pull those kinds of reports and analyze that criteria, and we're already 3 months behind in our purchasing now, and we hope to at some point get caught up to. At what point do all the departments get brought into their user interface, if you will, for that efficiency we're always looking for? How does that roll out?
It's a very good question. As the old adage says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Right. Right. And if, yes.
And so one of the great benefits, I believe, in this project is while we have a fairly modern SMS system in the sense it was implemented in the 2000s, some of our applications were going back into the 1980s. Yeah. But the fact that we are going from a financial system, which is standalone, and a purchasing system that's separate, to an integrated system that has both purchasing and financials in it should be a great leap forward. So all of the training that we've invested in our financial reporting for folks who use the Info Advantage system and report out of our financial information will be able to leverage the same to great detail with their purchasing system. So now we've got a much larger system that has a consolidated effort. So from a department empowerment perspective, they'll be able to get a lot more detail out of both purchasing and financial operations in one system. It also gives a capability to departments. So that right there is important because we've spent a lot of time investing in city staff to be able to pull reports and analyze a little deeper into the financial system, and they'll be able to leverage that with purchasing. For some of the other key areas of metrics, we're certainly open for discussions with council and mayor, and as those metrics come up, leveraging that in the new system is usually our take on it. I don't know if that answers your question sufficiently.
We are anticipating city resources to affect a change management program, and as soon as this contract is executed, we'll start reaching out to departments, getting them involved, having discussions with them about how this project will unfold and the types of benefits and impacts it will have on their operations. And we also have a training component as well in this contract where city staff and contractor staff will be providing training across using the system, but also including reporting aspects as well.
I think one aspect that also may be worth mentioning is the performance budgeting system that's being implemented is another CGI system. And so as you can see, not everything all belongs in the same system, but having your financials, your purchasing, and your performance budgeting in one application should make it much easier for the city to be able to provide those types of metrics.
What's the rollout for employee training?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it probably is primarily the rollout for training will primarily be in the third year, I believe, prior to the actual go live of the system. There have been some trainings already with regard to the staff who are working more directly on the project. And the change management aspect will be the communication piece, though. That will begin much more immediately.
There's $700,000 in the project plan invested towards staff training and staff preparedness.
I mean, that's a dollar amount. I don't know what the actual plan would, I'd have to see that in detail. But on the go live portion of it, we've had some experiences both in the city and the federal government and launching and going live on new systems that we'll just say haven't worked out really well for the end user and the consumer and the customer. Our latest with obviously DWP, the billing systems that have been horrific, to use a kind word. What is the objective to roll out or go live carefully and tested, ensuring that we're not going to simply flip over from a system that is antiquated and doesn't work to a system that, quite frankly, nobody will know how to use. And if we go live before the training and, we didn't anticipate that, so while it's great and it's up there, but nobody knows how to use it yet, Is that all being vetted through various policy committees or just on the technical side?
I can certainly speak to that. As the Controller's Office Manager for the financial management system, I was directly involved in the training process for that. And I've noticed that one of the systems that you did not mention in that list was the financial management system, and I think proudly so. We trained over 5,500 seats in a matter of months. Our training had constant evaluation from every attendee, and it was ranked over 85% in satisfaction across various areas. We work very closely to ensure that they were not only trained in the system, they were trained in process. So in the various areas, they had a good understanding of where things started, when the system would come into play, where it ended, including even after the fact reviews that were involved. We always do hands-on training, so folks are sitting down at a PC, live using it. We do real-world scenarios. We even have opportunities for them to bring in information from their departments to process it in the new system. Training is something that, there was a manager who once told me, he says, at best, Ted, training is always a C. And in that meeting, I said, I reject that answer. At the City of LA, good training for a city and for an application is the best mechanism to prevent it failing after go live, best measure for adoption, et cetera. Those same types of approaches is what's going to be done for the implement of the procurement system.
And I think the staff that we have, both at GSD, ITA, and the Controller's Office, are all veteran staff in this type of project. We've all
with all due respect, all three of you combined are way too young to consider yourself veterans, but yes, incredibly knowledgeable.
Not in this world.
But yeah, not in
the IT world.
That's a good point.
And to Todd's point, we all, as young as we may look, have experience because we were there firsthand in implementing the SMS system, which the first reiteration of it was highly successful, where we went from a mainframe to internet-based system. And from an SMS perspective, we also were hand in hand with the FMS group because there were a lot of tweaks and changes that we needed to make to the SMS system in order to make it compatible with the SMS. So there's a lot of history, familiarity, and so we're trying to build the teams with the people, the veterans or quasi-veterans, as you call them, may want to call them. So we're bringing in key folks back to assist in this effort. So I think we're fairly confident that lessons learned have been documented and noted, and we won't make any mistakes that may have caused setbacks previously. And we've got some good people working on this team.
And Councilman, to your point, this is a very large, very expensive project, and so you can expect periodic report backs. And if there's specific areas such as training and the training plan, then we certainly would take extra time to sit and discuss those items. I, like you, have seen multiple failed government projects. I continue to see them, and it disturbs me very much.
I think our biggest one was our payroll system, 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
I would agree with that.
The biggest one, and had a lot of issues ever since then.
Unacceptable. I would agree.
But that predates us a little bit. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for all the time that you've afforded me. Appreciate it.
Well, and you actually anticipated my concerns as well. Just one slight wrinkle on the last question is, aside from training in anticipation of problems and trying to prevent problems from happening, probably the DWP thought that they had done that too. There will be unanticipated things that are going to happen. So what will we also have a plan in place? And that's not so much for this committee as Mr. Blumenfield's committee to oversee. But I hope that as we get not too far down the road in this, we'll also be planning for the worst case scenario when we have to have multiple backup plans for the things that do go wrong, so that all of a sudden when we can't purchase anything or we can't pay our bills, there's something in place so that the day after that go-live date, we're not shutting down the city. That goes beyond just training our people. That goes to having several contingency plans as well. And given the fact that the last time we went through this drill, we got 4 good years out of the system before it started to go bad, what would you anticipate to be the likely life of this new shiny system?
I think one of the benefits we see here is instead of implementing a standalone purchasing system, we're bringing it into the fold, and there's an expression they use in IT, they call it Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP. And the idea that there's a lot of core business functions such as financials, purchasing, and even things like HR and payroll, which often integrate very well into one system. In fact, when the city did its RFP for this current FMS system, it mentioned things like procurement and these other aspects. They wanted to build out onto that one solid platform. Not everything belongs on the same platform, but by putting it, it helps with the care and feeding of the application. So by bringing the procurement system onto the same platform, the same support structure, running on the same hardware, supported by the same staff, then it ends up getting the attention. So now we have a financial system and purchasing system all rolled into one integrated system as opposed to something sitting on the side. I think that often happened with the purchasing system. But even to some of your points before regarding support and these other aspects, we're going to be leveraging a lot of good lessons learned that we had as successes both on the FMS project and others.
But more specifically, I mean, what would you anticipate to be the lifespan of a system like this, given the fact that we've limped ahead for 13 years with a system that only worked for 4? What I don't know if you can even make an estimate of that, but what would your best guess be for how many good years we're going to get out of this before we have to reinvest?
It's always difficult to forecast where the market will be, but in reality, with proper upgrades, with proper periodic upgrades, we can easily be getting 15 to 20 years out of these applications, so long as we provide the proper care and feeding.
Okay. Very good. Well, it sounds like everybody here agrees that it should be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations and to move forth with all deliberate speed. So thank you very much for your good work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 3.
Item 3 is a budget recommendation relative to instructing the city attorney to report to the Budget and Finance Committee on redefining local to mean city rather than county with regard to city purchasing programs.
Chair, the assigned attorneys are here now, so you don't mind waiting for a couple of seconds.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Laura Leitner from the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office.
Dan Cramping, Los Angeles City Attorney's Office.
We don't know what the question is. We understand that there's a question regarding local preference and the meaning of local preference.
Well, go ahead, Mr. Hammond.
I've been talking about it for years, and this is actually probably the 4th such motion to come in on this. And so on this, the local preference right now is defined, and so we have a lot of different incentive packages for bidders and RFPs and other things that we do policy-wise for local preference. And what we've referred to in local preference in years past is any business in the county of Los Angeles. And when that was initiated under the original charter and under the original definition of it, is they really defined local preference being because the county is so vast and so wide, and the city was still sort of new, and there were services that were offered outside of the city of Los Angeles but still in the county. And we really wanted to try to keep businesses local that we did business with in our partnerships. And so with that, a lot of the preferences out of local preference came out of definition historically of being any business doing business in the county. What we'd like to do, or in any way what I would like to do, and the idea of this, and that's been talked about over the years but never was able to make it to committee, so I really do appreciate the chairman scheduling this item as well, is to do one of two things. Come up with some ideas on either redefining local preference to mean the city of LA, not countywide. So businesses that are located within the city, or looking at that as a multi-tiered effort to have different local preference incentives where you get a certain percentage for being in the county, perhaps, and or a certain percentage or a greater percentage towards points on an RFP, for example, for being based in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, so, and let me, before you begin, so I can try to focus it in a little bit more. as the author of the existing local preference ordinance, we were explicitly told, and the mayor was explicitly told at the time that we were drafting that the charter required that the local, that the smallest local differentiation that you could draw would be the county. I never, to this day, I still don't really understand the legal reason for that, and I agree with Mr. England, there's certainly no policy reason for that I can envision. But if you can talk about, first of all, the legal restriction on that, and then second, related to what Mr. Englander just said, I think we're all interested in trying to find, within whatever the legal restrictions are, what can we do to focus economic activity in a way that will provide the greatest benefit to the city. So, for example, maybe based on other tax revenues that business is paying. If the business is paying sales tax to the city, or is there some other way to differentiate and give a benefit to those businesses that are from whom we're procuring goods or services based on other taxes that they're paying to the city, for example. I'm sorry, I had one other point I forgot. Oh, and then the final point is, if it is a charter restriction, what steps do we need to take in order to try to modify that in a way that will allow us to achieve the policy objectives that I think we all want to achieve here?
Yes, this has been a problem for a while because the limitation is actually found in Charter Section 371. As a charter city, we're bound by the limitations of our charter. And it explicitly says that that a preference can be allowed in the letting of contracts for California or Los Angeles County firms. And then there's more, but it's Charter Section 371A that contains the limitation. So for many years, this body has been very concerned about the fact that since this charter provision was adopted, there have been many changes, and that it might be more beneficial to the city to have a limitation that allows the boundaries to be the city of Los Angeles. We would need a charter amendment.
Go ahead.
So with that, what I'd like to do is a couple things. One is I've been told from, I think over the years I've asked 4 or 5 different city attorneys, and I've actually gotten, I think, 4 or 5 different opinions on that, that there may be ways we can amend our contracting language to go further, to give enhancements, if you will, for a preference in the city, but without changing the actual charter code. Furthermore, I think I would certainly be inclined to come up with some language if we, in fact, move forward and ask the voters to amend the charter for that. I'm fine with that. We do that all the time. We have tweaks and changes all the time. The fact that this was written 100 years ago, and we understand that we were in a very different place then, and it just wasn't picked up in the charter reform, we make changes all the time. It's sort of benign, if you will, and something I know that I would think the voters here in Los Angeles would certainly support. It makes sense. And so I think there's some various options we can look at, and creativity that we meet all the legal requirements. If there are things we can do now with our contracting to allow more points for just the city, but keep under local preference. There's some other ways I know the city attorney's office has shared with me that we could do this over the years. But I was never sitting in the seat here to ask the question. I was always on the other side of the room. So with that, if I could we ask this to come back in 30 days with some of those various recommendations, and maybe we can have some follow-up discussions and keep
Absolutely.
this very much alive?
You bet. Absolutely.
And we'd be happy to return with that.
And when you come back to, and maybe we can talk about this offline between now and
Thank you. I'd appreciate that also.
The fact that this is a list of inclusion in the charter, and it doesn't sound like a list of exclusion. Also, I'm sure there's a reason, and I know that typically that is the case, that a list of inclusion excludes all that's not included in the list, but it kind of doesn't, on its face, it kind of doesn't make sense to to either be the state or the county? What if it's Southern California? Something in between. It just, the charter language as it stands doesn't make any sense in terms, if our authority is only limited to that which is expressly included, it's logically inconsistent in itself.
It's clear to me that things have changed through the years, and I am sure that there are plenty of studies that would support the types of changes that you're actually requesting. We may need to look into that, and I would appreciate a conversation within the next week with either of your offices so that we can talk about the issues that I think we have here and potential resolutions. But with the charter being a document of limitation, it becomes difficult. But we would appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it this week and then report back in 30 days.
Very good. Mr. Blumenfield?
Just to put a fine point on it, so the recommendation would be 30 days to come back with various solutions in terms of other types of incentives that we could do within the existing reading of the charter, as well as language of how we would change the charter.
To the extent that it's possible to come up with other options within the limitations of the charter, we will provide those to you.
Right.
And
if not, why X, Y, or Z, why the obvious ones wouldn't work.
Yes.
And then the actual language for a charter change.
Simply, it won't work if somebody can call it a local preference that is inconsistent with the charter. Now, we can go into looking at different types of limitations, but the bottom line is going to be that if someone who's inclined to frame the argument can frame it in a manner that suggests that what we're really doing as a city is giving enhancements to a locality that is not allowed by Charter Section 371, then we've run into the issue. But we can flesh it out for you. I'm certainly not saying it to be discouraging, and I think that moving forward with a charter amendment and how you could most successfully go about doing that is something we will also explore for you.
Great. And also, when you come back, you don't need to answer it off the cuff right now, but if there are any other legal restrictions outside of the charter that we need to be aware of, then we should be informed of that as well. So one of my frustrations on the Metro Board is, as much as we've wanted to do a similar kind of thing there, if there's $1 of federal money involved in a project, we can't give preference to even a business within California, let alone locally. So, which is an absurd policy, but it's federal law. So if there are any sort of other restrictions like that that we need to be aware of.
That is one, and our charter also requires that, among other things, that an ordinance be adopted in order to grant the preference. So there's another legal hurdle that's also involved in our charter scheme.
And we have the ordinance. Now we just have to fix the ordinance.
And the whole idea and the spirit of this is, again, to remind everyone that we want to do businesses as a city with businesses that are located within the city and give them the highest and best option first. They bring more revenue back to the city. They typically employ more people that are residents here in the city. And so it makes a lot of sense as partners. And we certainly all remember so many examples where it just hasn't made sense. I think they called one Sandwich Gate.
Yes.
And so without going there, there are a lot of reasons for us wanting to do business with our resident businesses here in the city of Los Angeles.
And in order to essentially discriminate against firms that are outside of the city, we need to build a strong case for it. And the law does provide for the ability to take studies and take relevant information. All of the facts that you just stated are supported by studies. that have been done.
That's a good point.
And we will need to compile those studies in order to support this kind of change.
Well, Dan's not doing anything this weekend, so yeah, that's perfect. And then,
But those are some of the steps that need to be, that would need to take place.
excellent. No, thank you very much.
Nothing to add except to, I agree with everything that's said. It's just if we need to find studies that give us a justification for not doing all of the county, I would imagine there are other cities in the county that may already have a local purchase provision that we want, so that may give us some...
I think you're right. I've seen enough evidence, and we just need to compile it.
Fantastic. And one last thing, just for the record, what irks me even more than that is when there's businesses outside the city of Los Angeles that actually use the city of Los Angeles as on their business cards and their letterhead and their website. And we won't go there with the Angels, but we'll just talk about actual businesses that operate in other cities that say they're based in the city of Los Angeles because they want the name. They do not pay any business tax. I think no business in LA should pay the gross receipts tax, but I stand alone. I'm the loneliest.
As long as you can find me $440 million, you won't stand alone,
That's
believe me.
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. McQuiston, before we act on this matter, Mr. McQuiston has a comment.
Jim McQuiston. I thought this was Tuesdays. I do want to say, I've done a lot of lawsuits, and one of the things that always comes up in a lawsuit is, are you local or are you foreign? Because that determines where you can file a suit. And as long as you have a local office, you're local. And that means GE in Schenectady would be local as long as they have an office in Los Angeles. So that means they're local. And yet they're not going to be building anything, and everything is going to be done in Schenectady. So for the major purchases, and also if you look at Morrison Knudsen or somebody like that, where we need a big contractor, they're not going to be based in Los Angeles. We want the lowest responsible bidder because it's our money that's being spent. And I think what's going to happen is that we aren't going to be able to do it for various reasons, mostly legal reasons, but also just because we want the lowest responsible bidder. And if that's going to be somebody in Japan, really, well, we want the highest quality and the lowest price we can get. And if they have an office in Los Angeles, fine. And if they don't have an office, we want to make sure that they have service people that are available. But otherwise, when you get to somebody who's local, if it's an employee has to be traveling on the freeways or whatnot, you want a local employee. That makes sense. I mean, there's a safety reason. There's some reason where you can do something like that. But when you're just getting a product or something like that, I think really what you want is the lowest responsible bidder, and you don't care where they are as long as they give you good service.
Thank you. So, members, without objection, then we'll bring this matter back in 30 days for a more thorough discussion with recommendations from the city attorney.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5 is a budget recommendation relative to instructing the city attorney, with assistance from the city administrative officer, the chief legislative analyst, and the Office of Finance, to report on the application of Transient Occupancy Tax on rooms rented by Airbnb and other entities that compete with the local hotel, with the hotel industry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Beverly Cook, Assistant City Attorney with the Office of the City Attorney. We have looked at your question. I've discussed it with the Office of Finance as well as the CAO's office. And the short answer is we cannot tax or require Airbnb to collect the TOT for this on behalf of the city. And it has to do with the definitions that were adopted in 1964. And so what you really have is a system that was based on the traditional brick-and-mortar hotel with an individual walking in and booking a room and the operator paying the tax. We attempted to amend the definition of operator in 2004 to accommodate actually the online companies like Expedia and those types of entities that did hotel bookings online. And what the court said in that particular case was, one, the definition did not fit those companies, and two, the definition that we had adopted in 2004 was not voted on by ballot measure, and therefore we could not adopt it until we took that step. Airbnb fits that profile. So the answer to the question is, yes, we can tax the host, and they're subject either to business tax and perhaps even depending upon the number of rooms that they rent out, and they're also required to collect the transient occupancy tax, but it's not the Airbnb, it's the owner of the property that would be required to collect the TOT.
So just to be clear, without any changes in anything, under the current law, any exchange of money for lodging, in this case by a homeowner who's operating through Airbnb, gives rise to an obligation to pay the TOT.
That's correct.
By the property owner.
That's correct.
Okay. So in several cities, I think Airbnb already has reached agreements with those cities to act essentially as an agent for collection of the tax obligation that's currently owed and not being collected. Is that right?
That's my understanding. We actually reached out to the city of San Francisco because we believe that that's the agreement that they've reached. We haven't had any luck in discussing it with the city of Portland, and someone had mentioned the city of Palm Springs as well. What we can tell you from the city of San Francisco is, one, Airbnb is located there. And so they have a different relationship with the city itself, and so they had reached an agreement that they would begin, I believe, this summer collecting the tax in these types of transactions. Whether they are doing it or not yet, I don't know, because it was prospective at that point. The second thing that we found out was the city of San Francisco did amend their regulations under the Transient Occupancy Tax, and it would be similar to what we had attempted to do in 2004. Now, what we have is a court decision that says we can't do it. I don't know if theirs has been tested yet. So those are the things that we found out about San Francisco. We believe that if they were willing to reach an agreement with the city, certainly we would accept it. The question is, would it be enforceable? Could we legally enforce it, the ordinance against them, and require them to collect the TOT? And we do not believe that under the current circumstances that we can, the current versions of the ordinance that we can.
Sure, but if there's an agreement, then you could structure a contractual relationship that would have contractual remedies.
That's right, yes.
And underlying that, we would still have the belts and suspenders ability to go and enforce against the actual property owner to enforce their current obligation to pay tax that they may or may not be paying right now.
That's correct. And they have that obligation. It currently exists. It exists under the 1964 version. But I guess it just presents a practical question of how do you find these people? How do you know who they are? The Office of Finance would then have that responsibility to find each and every homeowner who's actually leasing out their space under these conditions.
And presumably that would have to be part of the contractual relationship.
That's correct. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had suggested this during the budget process for a number of different reasons. I mean, the chief one for this committee's jurisdiction is the money, because I think it's a potential revenue stream. The other, though, and I think it's worth noting, is the impact on, not just on the hotels, but on affordable housing in Los Angeles. Because I have coastal communities in my district, we have a lot of people using Airbnb. And as a result of the dynamic has become not just a single-family homeowner renting out their place or something like that, but we've got people in Venice now, and it's happening in large numbers, buying entire apartment buildings, evicting everyone, taking everything off the rental market, and making it all Airbnb, which is a direct competition with the hotels, and it's having a significant impact on affordable housing in Venice and on the rental market. And it's much worse, obviously, in my district than in other parts of the city, but it's something I'm eager to see us move on. Two things. I've had interns looking into this and staff members looking into this for a while. I will have my staff provide you all the research we have done on the various different cities, including Palm Springs. I've also had conversations with folks from Airbnb, and they are I'd say, willing and maybe even on the verge of eager to do something with the city of Los Angeles in order to help us collect the TOT. They're very willing to be a partner. They have in New York, they have in San Francisco, they have in other cities, and they are even willing to help us with regulations to prevent that situation that I'm talking about where we're losing the 30 units of rental housing, because that's not their business model. So we can definitely do some stuff in that field. Until a few months ago, Airbnb was sort of operating, or people who were availing themselves of Airbnb to rent out their properties were operating under the assumption that they were legal, or at least not explicitly illegal, in the city of Los Angeles. Since then, planning has issued a determination that they're not legal, and so I think some of them have gone sort of underground even as they've proliferated. I know that prior to that time, there were folks in Los Angeles who were charging a TOT. Do we know, were we getting that money? Do we know?
Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance. There are some of these property owners that are registered or that the Office of Finance has discovered, and as we discover these businesses or these homeowners that are engaged in this activity, we do register them for business tax as well as transient occupancy tax purposes. So there is some revenue that is coming in, but again, given the fact that it is a residential activity, we normally do not have enforcement activities in residential neighborhoods, just for the obvious fact that it's kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, we do have various databases and other data that we do use for discovery purposes where we have been able to identify some of these businesses. Obviously, the issue has, now that it has come to light, has changed the business practices, where in the past you could actually identify certain addresses on the various websites of these types of businesses. That has changed. We're now, until you actually go in and make a decision to rent a certain location, that information is no longer available. So it's become harder for our office to identify these businesses, but we do have various discovery programs that we continue to utilize.
Well, I have a lot of people who live in haystacks, and they spend a lot of their free time looking for needles. I get people who call all the time saying, this whole building is now Airbnb, or, my neighbor is doing this. If folks identify properties, is that something we can do something with?
Yes, definitely. If there is information that is out there that does come to your attention or any of the council office's attention, they certainly can provide that to the Office of Finance, and we would encompass that and include that in any of our discovery and compliance efforts.
Have we had any, you had talked about how the previous ordinance 2004, we had legal problems with it?
Well, what happened was, in anticipation of some litigation with the online travel companies and their bookings and how they paid the city taxes, the TOT taxes, we amended the ordinance to broaden the definition of an operator. So it wasn't just a traditional brick and mortar someone walking in off the street, we said an additional operator was also these internet companies. And so it would have encompassed an Airbnb. However, in the course of challenging the OTCs, the court ruled against us and said, you have this new definition that would have included these folks as an operator, but we believe that you should have taken that and placed it on the ballot and gotten the approval because it's a change in methodology. We don't agree with that, and so we've appealed it, but at this point, that's what's standing now.
But that was, to make an analogy, that would have been the equivalent of taxing Airbnb and not the person who's using Airbnb to advertise.
Right. And that was our argument, Council Member. We believe that it's not a tax on the individual, so it's not a tax that's subject to 218. It's not an increase in the base in the rate or the change in methodology because these folks just collect it. They don't pay it. It's the individual who actually occupies the room that pays the tax, so there shouldn't have been a change in that tax at all. All we're saying is there's an additional group of operators out there who should collect it. And so we disagree with the court's decision about it being subject to 218, but unfortunately right now they've had the last word.
So if we were to have some discussions and reach an agreement with Airbnb and we're going to sort of codify sort of in both planning and in finance documents, it's okay to do online vacation rentals of your property in areas zoned such and such for this length of time or however many days per year, and then you pay the TOT. Are you saying you think that would be something that would have to be, the courts will say that needs to be subject to Prop 218?
Not if Airbnb voluntarily entered into an agreement with the city to collect it from these folks and remit it to the city. I don't believe that it would impact or require 218 vote because it's voluntary. What we were looking at is trying to impose it without their voluntary agreement. We were essentially saying, based upon the ordinance itself, you're subject to collect these taxes. But a voluntary agreement would be a contract, and I would gather, although I'm a little bit concerned with what San Francisco has, they did expand their definitions and include the group, but we have that as well. So I think in answer to your question, if someone voluntarily entered into a contract with the city and collected it, I don't think we would have a problem.
Gotcha on that, but
okay.
Airbnb is sort of the big dog in this right
Yes.
now. In 3 years, maybe someone else is. There's also smaller dogs who do the same thing. There's vacation rental by owner and stuff like that. If we make an agreement with Airbnb and then we try to codify that business model as being subject to TOT, are you saying that might be legally problematic?
Yes, I think that still would be legally problematic for other folks who are not privy to a contract between the city, between themselves and the city. Because we have an agreement with Airbnb, and if we codified it, it doesn't mean that it's applicable to other folks if the court is correct and we require a 218 ballot measure. It simply means that it's an agreement between the two parties to the agreement. It does not impact or require any other outside third parties like the vacation rental people. They wouldn't be subject to the same agreement that we've reached with Airbnb.
How is their effectively becoming a hotel any different than a new hotel opening up? I mean, they're both choosing a business model that would have the TOT applied.
Unfortunately, the way the definitions are stated in our ordinance, the Airbnb is not itself a hotel. It's not a new hotel. It's not, the operator is the brick and mortar. It is the place where you walk in. When this was codified in 64, we didn't anticipate online bookings, I think, is the problem. And so it's not that we're restricting a new hotel from opening up, and that new hotel would definitely be subject to the TOT. the business tax and TOT. But what you're talking about is a different entity. So you have three parties with the Airbnb scenario. You have the Airbnb, that's where it's kind of like, I guess, the Craigslist. And then you have the host, you're the owner of the property, and then the occupant of the rooms that are actually reserved through the Airbnb system. So they're not a hotel, they're once removed from that hotel. They have no ownership interest. They just set up the relationship between the host and the property owner. I'm sorry, the host and the actual occupant.
So last question. Might it then not be smarter for us to think about this from the opposite angle and change our definition of hotel?
I guess, well, it's going to be changing quite a few definitions. It's going to be the tax imposed. One of the frustrations in looking at the online lawsuits, and the city of LA wasn't the only one. Anaheim, San Diego, Santa Monica, San Francisco has all been involved in litigation, and we've all lost. And it comes down to a simple fact. At the time that the ordinances were drafted, the taxes imposed on the amount that the operator collects. If we had said that the tax is imposed on the amount paid by the occupant, it would be clear sailing. But at the time that the ordinances were drafted, it didn't matter, because the amount paid by the person walking in to book a room or the operator, the amount paid to the operator were one and the same. It only changed with the advent of the online entities and them doing these booking services. So there are a number of definitions that would have to be changed. And one of the concerns would be, would a court, similar to what they've already done in the OTC cases, say this is a change that is subject to 218? Because, based upon their analysis in that particular case, they could very well say that. So I don't know if just changing the definition of hotel, we would for sure have to change the definition of operator.
Just to clarify that, though, Mr. Bonin asked if somebody purchases an apartment building and begins to use Airbnb to rent out those apartments, why would they not be treated the same as a new hotel? In fact, for TOT purposes, they are treated the same as a new hotel, right? Because the burden to pay the tax attaches as soon as they start collecting money to...
It should be on the owner.
Whether it's through Airbnb or through a sign on the door, it doesn't make any difference.
And under those circumstances, it seems to me that the host would be easier to find because he owns the entire building. Right. So, and you have no problem whatsoever in going after them on that basis because they are subject to the tax.
So the issue is not the tax liability, it's from whom do you collect the tax liability.
And who do you know about? We know about the Airbnb. We don't know about all of these little individuals who are then renting out their space. But in your scenario, it would be easier to discover those folks if they've rented out the entire building.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Can you talk about difficulty in discovering who these folks are? I mean, while we're standing here, I just went online to Airbnb, clicked in Los Angeles, and I got the list of all the folks. And it shows you a map with a little dot on it. It doesn't tell you the exact suite number, but there's also a button you just press that says contact host. What's to prevent us, and why aren't we, or can we just using the Airbnb website, send a letter to every one of these folks saying, under city law, XYZ, you're here on notice, you owe the TOT. That would certainly light a fire under Airbnb to make a voluntary arrangement because it would scare the hell out of all the people who are renting out their house.
It's perfectly legal. That would be legal, and I guess it would be up to the Office of Finance to send that letter out. But no, that's perfectly legal. As long as we have an address and we know the address of the host, they're subject to collect the TOT.
What if you don't know the exact address of the host, which is like the case on this, when I clicked on Airbnb, it shows you the map, it shows you exactly the street. It doesn't tell you, you might be off by one or two houses, but there's a button that says contact host. Is there anything that would prevent us from using their own website to contact each of these hosts and hostesses?
I think the issue, and you just hit the nail on the head, having the address. We actually are aware. We've visited their sites. We've attempted to identify various addresses, and where we have been successful, we have sent out letters. We have attempted to bring these homeowners into compliance, but the larger issue is identifying the exact addresses. So where we can, we do send out notices of potential issues with business tax and TOT, but again, the issue is identifying those specific addresses.
Why not just have somebody go through the website with a letter and cut and paste the letter and send it to every host via the Airbnb website? Even if you don't have the exact address, they're advertising themselves as a host in Los Angeles with a price and a picture of their home. You may not even know their name, but you can certainly send them a notice through the website. Is there any reason that we're not doing that, or can we do that?
Well, we as I said, we have sent out notices. We've also contacted some of these entities, such as VRBO, as Councilmember Bond has said, as well as Airbnb. And when we try to contact them, unfortunately, most of the time we're not successful. Their cooperation basically shuts down. So I think it is a matter of working with our city attorney to determine whether these entities are willing to come forward and enter into some type of voluntary agreement.
Maybe I'll push this one step further. See if we can direct Office of Finance to send a letter to each and every host in Airbnb via the Airbnb website and Vacation, any other similar sites, using their information to send them a letter, whether or not we have their address, or whether or not we have their name.
To inform them of their obligation to pay the business tax and to pay the TOT on their revenues. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so how do I amend? I'd like to amend this. This is really a report, I guess. But amend this report to include a directive to Office of Finance to do that, to do just that.
I think that's a very good motion. I'll second it. If there's no objection, that'll be the, we will so instruct.
Okay, I have a separate line of question, but I wanted to pursue that. So, okay, great. Check that off. What's that?
Yeah.
So all not single line. Airbnb was the example just because I went on their website and saw how easy it is. But to do any other feasible site, I mean, there's only 3 or 4 of them, so to just go up. Secondly, the 64 codified, you're mentioning what was codified in 64 that's preventing us. Could you explain exactly what you're referring to?
In the the Transient Occupancy Tax Ordinance was adopted in 1964, and it essentially states that the operator of a hotel, bed and breakfast, or any lodging facility is obligated to collect on behalf of the city its transient occupancy tax.
And so you were saying that one thing we could do, but then the question, I'm repeating it just to make sure I understand it, so I apologize if it sounds like repeating what you said, but I just want to make sure I understand it. If we were to change that to operator, to any money paid to the operator, that would solve our problem.
Correct.
Except for the 218
That's correct.
possibility.
That's correct. The court has said if we are going to change the definition, because we've tried already without a ballot measure, if we change it, it looks like the court is saying we would have to put that out to ballot.
But that hasn't been tested.
No, that has not been tested. We have not received direction to place it on the ballot, no.
Is that something that we can do what's the legal term for it, where we put it out to the courts and ask them to make the decision? Ask them to
Declaratory relief.
Thank you. It's for 200, preemptory release. Is that something that we could put for, what is it you just said?
Declaratory relief.
Declaratory relief, yes, that's the word.
Well, we don't need to at this point because the court's already ruled. So they've ruled on it, but we have appealed that decision. It's still pending, and one of the things that I should mention is it's in a separate lawsuit. We will be bringing shortly a report to you about that case, and we can get into further detail and explain the ramifications of it. But at this point, the court has already ruled that we do need to place it on the ballot before we can change the definition, before we can legally change the definition and have an enforceable definition. And what we have done is we've challenged that ruling. No court has decided, the higher court has not decided yet whether or not they accept our argument or the argument, they believe the argument of the OTCs and also the judgment of the court in that case. So it's already at issue, I guess. It's just a final decision has not been made.
What's the timeline on that decision?
Probably several more months. One of the things that is delaying the city proceeding with its appeal of the OTC cases is that the other cities were ahead of us, and they have similarly challenged the court and its rulings as well. And I believe that late this summer, the city of, I believe it was the city of San Diego, challenged the court and asked that they rehear the matter. The court would not rehear the matter, but it leaves us in a position to ask the Supreme Court to take a look at the case. If the Supreme Court chooses not to, we still have the ability to proceed with our appeal as well. But that's kind of where we are.
I just wanted to add two quick notes. One, I just want to underscore my experience with Airbnb, at least, has been very positive. They've been engaged on this issue. They're willing to be good, productive partners. I just wanted to make sure that that's clear and in the record. I do want to make clear that this is also a growing phenomenon rapidly. At least one of these online companies has started hiring community organizers to go out and recruit more people to be part of it. They're going out to community festivals and stuff like that. So it's going to be a growing phenomenon for the good or for the bad, but certainly for the potential benefit of the city treasury. I'm just curious, the council also acted to form a working group on the shared economy that's going to be looking at a lot of these issues, and certainly that'll be a good venue to discuss the planning and the zoning implications of this. In the meantime, though, there seems to be interest from Airbnb, interest from folks interested in the city's pocketbook to get stuff going. What's the best way to take the next step to continue those discussions?
If you would like, I would certainly like to talk to your staff members, and if they've reached out, if Airbnb has reached out to the city and they're willing to engage with us, let us know, and we'd like to work with your staff and talk to them and see what it is we can accomplish. The other thing is recommend that you consider placing it on the ballot. Well, I'm sorry that doesn't go over very well, but that's another option. But certainly, I'd like to work with your staff and see what it is we can accomplish through the Office of Finance as well, to see what we can do on a voluntary basis. But as I said, that's only the one entity. It wouldn't expand it to all of the others.
I think I'm going to suggest that we ask the CAO, first of all, to identify the contractual relationships that are already in existence between cities and not only Airbnb, but its competitors, and then to come back here to this committee with a proposal. I don't think we need any reports. We need a proposal for agreements that can be entered into, and then this committee can instruct the CAO to begin negotiating those agreements in consultation with the city attorney's office to ensure that obviously the contractual obligations are sound and legitimate, and that we're within the confines of Prop 218 and otherwise. But I think we should just be moving. The CAO should be moving forward in getting these agreements done. We shouldn't let another month go by without collecting the revenues that we're currently entitled to, which we're not collecting. And I think that recommendation, together with Mr. Blumenfield's suggestion about putting the current what are they called? Hosts. The hosts on notice of their existing obligation, I think is a good one as well. It might very well be that a lot of these folks are just unaware that they even have an obligation to pay. And when you find them there, they become aware. But in order to address the needle in the haystack problem, sending out those sorts of notices eliminates a lot of that problem. And more importantly, it puts them all on notice. So when we do down the road encounter them, they don't have the opportunity to be able to claim that this was anything other than an intentional evasion of the tax. So anything further, members? All right, then was that clear enough? All right, so that will be the action of the committee. And that brings us then to, thank you both very much. That brings us then to items 7 through 10. I don't think you need to read all of them. We'll just take them all collectively in that they all deal with the same general subject matter. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Selwyn Hollins, Los Angeles Department of Transportation.
So we have several different versions of essentially the same question, which is, what's going on with striping these days?
Right, okay. I believe at the T Committee, we provided a report that consolidated these 4 council files because they all are interrelated. And at that time, we talked about a number of things and the different impacts, but it was referred to this committee because it really got down to resource allocations and some of the disparities between street services in our department. Some of the things that we've done to try to better manage the coordination efforts beyond what we've been doing over the years, for this current fiscal year, starting in July, the mayor's office has had bi-weekly meetings for the sole purpose of discussing resurfacing. They are referred to as the 2400 meetings. That is the desire to achieve 2,400 lane miles this fiscal year of resurfacing. Those meetings are attended or chaired by the mayor's office and attended by DOT, street services, the city attorney. At times, the CAO's office attends, as well as general services department. We also are in the process of launching a new work order system. We've been using a paper-based system for the past 40 years to coordinate it on the DOT side, and we're in beta testing mode, and we hope to have that launched October 1st, which will hopefully streamline some of the particulars about moving the work from the design phase to the actual implementation. We did move a couple of staff members over to the resurfacing side to help with some of the coordination, and more recently, the city did approve our ability to hire positions as well as new hires, which was a concern at T Committee, the inability to hire new hires. This will allow us to fill all of our positions this fiscal year without going to manage hiring, as well as the anticipated attrition of many of our staff to backfill those positions relatively quickly. But on the issue of disparity at the meeting at the T Committee, we talked a little bit about some of the issues with equipment, staffing, and also contractor services. And so I'm prepared to address any questions you may have, but also on the issue of equipment, I would like to say the one striper that we will be receiving estimated in March, that's only one white striper. And as you know, at the T Committee, I talked about 2 white stripers as referred to in the report, where one has been out of commission for over a year. The other one is been in and out of the shop about 131 days last fiscal year. Getting one additional white striper, when you consider most of the striping on the street is white with bike lanes, lane lines, etc., is probably not going to get us very far. I would just put forth as maybe something for consideration that we start examining now before the budget season comes how to possibly use MICLA or some other funding to get the ball rolling so that we get a head start on getting additional equipment. The street resurfacing program is not going anywhere anytime soon. It is a very costly and labor-intensive effort, and equipment is critical. On the issue of contracting, we did supplement some of our work with contractors. Our budget for contracting is usually, we spend $2 to $3 million a year. Last fiscal year, we spent $7 million on contracting. That was not money that we had. We had to find ways to absorb it in-house. On the issue of overtime, we spent another, I think, $2.7 million or so on overtime of our own staff. And as you know, we still are not keeping up. So if we're going to stabilize this, the 2,400 miles is more miles than we've ever done in the history of the city. And our department ran out of funding last year. To try to keep this up is going to be a challenge moving forward. Also, what we are working on is a new budget proposal in addition to this, where we're not just asking for staff, we're looking at technologies and things to help us to make sure we're doing it as efficiently as possible. So it's not simply we need bodies. Bodies without equipment, without knowing what we're doing, making sure we're not duplicating efforts, et cetera, would just be a waste of money. So we are working on that currently to have that report. We're finalizing it, and we hope to have something within the next month or so that would be ready to go and start more intense discussions.
I don't mean to beat a dead striping truck or anything, but how is it that one vehicle can be out of commission for over a year? How is that possible?
The equipment is very old, and some of the parts are no longer manufactured, so that's part of the problem. I think that particular vehicle was purchased maybe 8 years ago or so. A lot of miles on it. You're running it hot every day. We talked at the last meeting about how...
No, I'm sorry. It's a different question. I understand why they might be susceptible to breaking down, but how is it that we can't get it fixed within a year?
It's a part. There were parts ordered. The parts came in, didn't quite match, so we've been working closely to try to find a way to make the parts. Let's put it this way. There are some maintenance is done by general services, engines, tires, some of the lubricants. Some of the apparatuses our own crews do. We have a couple of people at our equipment repair shop, and they try to they're very creative, and they find ways to do with what they have. It's almost as though, if you personalize it to your own, in the old days we had jalopies, and you just find a way to tweak it to make it run. That's kind of where we are.
So what's the expected lifespan for one of these vehicles? If this is 8 years old and it's very old, as you described it, what's
typically you can get 8 to 10 years, but most agencies that do resurfacing don't do it at the level that we do here in the city of Los Angeles. The demand, we're using it every single day. You go to a lot of neighboring cities, they do piecemeal type of work. Our contractors obviously are huge, so they have overlap with their equipment. We do not. So we have 2 long line white stripers for the entire city that we've had for a long period of time. They pretty much are pretty beat up.
Okay. What are the crews doing when their truck is down?
The crews, they're trained in other things. So there's times when we really need to get a job done, they'll do what's called burn downs. And I think Councilman Bonnet has seen that, where they come out with a blowtorch and they use hand jacks and other things. That's a more time-consuming and more physically demanding approach. So they'll do that. They also can help. We have a lot of maintenance work in the city, general maintenance work with striping and painting that sometimes they could assist with. The challenge is they come in the middle of the night. While we're sleeping, they're out working 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. If the equipment goes down while they're in progress, they get it into the shop. We meet monthly with GSD. Our striping trucks are top priority. They are really good about getting our trucks back on the road. But if a truck is out for a couple of days, the crews will provide assistance wherever we need them.
Mr. Bonner?
When's the last time we bought a striper?
I believe 4 years ago. We have 3 yellows, 2 white stripers.
And were we able to keep up with the workload then?
It was a lot less than it is now, and we had more staff. Keep in mind, about 4 years ago is when the city started to downsize. So the city downsized, but resurfacing has increased. Were we able to keep up? To my understanding, it was a lot better than what it is today.
So, as I recall from the T-Committee discussion, of the 2 machines, the older one is the one that functions better. It's the new one that's been breaking?
No.
No?
That may be some of the melters on some of the other trucks. Some of the newer melters kind of...
So to keep up with, like right now, it's taking literally months to catch up. I drove a street yesterday that we've been getting complaints about for a very long time, probably at least 90 days. They resurfaced Olympic Boulevard near the 405 the other day, and I'm terrified about how long that might take. I'm assuming that gets to the front of the line because it's such a major street. What would it take, given the new workload with the increased resurfacing miles that we're doing, the demands of redoing bike lanes and stuff like that, how many machines do we really need in order to keep up?
That's what we're doing an assessment of right now. Our goal is to have everything restriped within 10 days or less. Okay. 15 years ago, turnaround time was 24 hours. Okay. But it was 4 times as many people, staff, equipment, everything. You had asked a question about miles, and I can say this. In fiscal year 2009 to 10, there was 550 miles, and whereas in last fiscal year, it was 700 miles.
So I mean, there's 2 pieces to the equation. I mean, the input you're going to get is the input you're going to get. The number of miles they resurface is going to be the numbers of miles you're going to resurface. That you can't control. The 2 things which you actually can't control, but presumably we can, is how many people you need and how many machines you need to keep up with that. You said you guys are working on something. When do you think you'll be able to articulate for us what the need is?
Probably within a month. We are really close. Remember, there's slurry and there's resurfacing. 2 totally different processes. For the resurfacing, which are on the major arterials, we have to mark out. We have 1 mark-out crew for the entire city. So before you can go stripe, you have to have the diagram. The mark-out crew looks at the design and puts it down. In order, the crews can't stripe until it's marked out. So one of the first points of attack is having at least an additional mark-out crew to keep up. Okay. So when you have resurfacing where they have 8 crews operating 7 days a week, we don't operate 7 days a week. You got 1 mark-out crew chasing all these jobs around the city every single day. Things happen. And what we want to do at a bare minimum is mark that street out as soon as it goes dark. That at least lets you know, hey, where's the center line should be, the motorist can have some sense of where the limit lines are. Without that, we can't even begin to stripe. So that doesn't require, that's a staffing issue there. Equipment is where you talk about the stripers and all that. So what we want to do is lay it out so you can see the components that go into it, not just say, hey, we need a lot of staff. That's not necessarily the approach we want to take.
The reason I'm asking how long it's going to take you is I think that our first bite at the apple to be able to try to look at a solution, or at least a partial solution, will be in our first quarter FSR. And I'm just afraid that it may take you guys longer to define the ask than we'll have before they start working on that.
Yeah, and if I can just take it even one step further, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that some of the equipment that we use is, it's not exactly off the shelf. We've specialized it in a variety of ways, which inevitably leads to a longer procurement process, longer process of providing the specs and then putting out an RFP or whatever you do to procure, and that process is lengthened by the special nature of our equipment. So it just reinforces the need to act quickly in getting that process started. But I would also, I guess, if we could, just why is it that we have specialized equipment? What's different between our striping and Fullerton's striping that we need specialized equipment and other cities don't? What's special about Los Angeles when it comes to striping?
Actually, we use the same type of equipment that they use. Many of the other cities do contract out the work. There's only so many contractors that do this type of work. There's only a limited number of companies that make this. What you have is you have this huge heavy-duty piece of equipment that heats up the thermoplastic, which comes really hard. It heats it up to over 400 degrees, and then there's lasers and all that kind of help lay it out on the street. This is not something that not a lot of cities do a lot of striping of this type. We use thermoplastic. A lot of cities will use paint. So because we're using thermoplastic that has to heat up, it's a special type of heavy-duty equipment. The equipment, we purchase it through the General Services Department. We have specs, so it's easy for us to just add on to the existing order, but it takes 8 months to build it. It's no different than if you had a bus built. If you went out and got a new bus, it's going to take, in general, depending on the specs you have, a period of time. Also, the trucks are not interchangeable. You have yellow, you have white. If you mix, the thermal, it's going to affect the integrity of the colors. So the equipment costs upwards of over $700,000 for a general striper, the type we're buying. There is higher end types of products, but we're trying to manage in consideration of the city's financial situation.
Maybe I didn't understand correctly then. So if we go out and hire a contractor and they're using thermoplastic as well, they're using the same kinds of equipment that we are. There's nothing different about our thermoplastic vehicles than the contractors.
No, they may have a different manufacturer, and some manufacturers are higher end than others.
Okay.
But that's the extent of it. This is not the type of equipment that you can have a company go and add an apparatus to or something put together. It's a very sensitive piece of equipment, but it's also, because of the heating components, it's a very delicate piece of equipment too. You don't do it right, you could have a major disaster on your hands.
And under normal use, the life expectancy of
it can get to 8 to 10 years. Okay. We're pushing hard though. So,
why do we use thermoplastic instead of paint?
For maintenance reasons. Thermoplastic typically will last you 6 to 8 years. Paint, depending on the high volume usage, where it is, it can go from 6 months to 2 to 4 years.
Is a machine that applies a paint stripe significantly cheaper than one that applies a thermoplastic?
Yes.
Given the crisis we're in right now with the backlog, is there any merit to doing some of our backlog with paint so that we don't have missing crosswalks and we don't have missing center lines?
That's a strategy we've started to implement. The reality is we're conscious that potentially in again 6 months to 2 years, we may have to go revisit that location and do it over again because of the fading.
So in some cases, we may not be getting there for 6 months anyway.
Right.
And the reason I ask that, one, I think that may be a potential intermediary or stopgap measure, is if the thermoplasty machines are more rare, I'm wondering if there aren't other cities or the county or jurisdictions that might have a slightly older paint machine that they no longer use that we could purchase or lease or borrow so that we can not have to wait another 5 or 6 months for something to get on order so we can get something out on the streets.
Yes, we explore that. Part of the challenge is whenever you add new vehicles on, particularly that require maintenance, is the ability of General Services to have sufficient resources to work on that equipment as well. So in our meetings with them, we do discuss this at length. Our idea would be if there is some more economical way to expand our fleet, but again, if it's going to require maintenance, they're the arm that we're going to have to rely on for a lot of that maintenance.
Okay, but that's a secondary question. The first is let's get what it takes to get the streets striped. If then that's going to require some maintenance, we should get to that question, but we should at least we can't not be evaluating options for doing the streets because it may raise other issues. I mean, it sounds like they're all going to raise some other ancillary issue, whether it's additional funding or the need to change to paint or additional resources in DOT or General Services, but we need to get those options on the table so we can pick one.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, and toward that end, one of the other variables is our liability. I imagine our liability increases as every day goes. If you get it done within 24 hours, if there's an accident, you're liable, but it's more understandable if it's been 6 months. pretty much going to get sued to the maximum amount if there's an accident because it wasn't striped properly. So as we weigh and balance the financing of whatever option it is, paint, as an interim measure versus the expenditure and the maintenance factor, liability has to be one of those questions, because I'm, as we all are, very worried about safety, but also the financial liability that is out there when we're not striped properly. So I don't know if part of the report back is going to include that analysis, but I'd love to see that and sort of how we're getting to the place of what decisions we're making in terms of painting versus the thermal machine versus everything else that goes in, so that we can make that decision quickly. Another issue in these issues has to do with the signal loops, and I wanted to do we have adequate funding for the signal loops given the funding levels for street resurfacing?
There's a difference between slurry and resurfacing, and 60% of all the work is slurry. And slurry is where you see many of the dark streets more often in longer periods, and there's dynamics for that. Resurfacing, we have a 30-day committed list that we receive from street services, so we know the work is going to happen. But every time there's resurfacing, the loops are only 3 to 4 inches under the surface, so they get damaged. When the loops get damaged, no, there was never any funding to replace those loops. So what we do is we do replace loops, but again, as stated in the report, loops on major arterials where most of the resurfacing occurs are pretty secure. That's not what triggers the timing so much. It's the perpendicular side streets that go into it. So when a car drives up to a loop that's on the cross street, that tells a signal, hey, someone's waiting here to make a turn or to go forward. That affects the loops on the arterial. If there's no cars on the side streets, it's pretty much green all the time. So what we do is we prioritize those side streets because that's what's triggering the loops. So people will see resurfacing and they don't see a loop. They're assuming on the arterial that maybe something is affecting the signal. It's the side streets that are impacting those signals, and that's how we look at it. So because we don't have funding for it, that's how we prioritize. We look at the side streets, what's triggering the loops, and that's what we go after. But it's not just resurfacing that removes loops. When streets start to deteriorate, the loops get exposed, it damages. There's a lot of construction throughout the city that damages the loops. So in the report we talked about, I think last year we had to replace over 5,000 loops. Right now we have a backlog, I believe, over 3,000 some odd loops. I mean, loops are a constant in this city. Throughout the city, there's always something going on impacting the loops. So it's not that it's just resurfacing. We don't look at a loop as a resurfacing loop gets a priority over any other loop. It's where the loop is occurring, what's the impact on the traffic. Every time a loop is damaged, we get automatic alerts. We know where the damage is occurring. It's a matter of looking at the impacts and what is the most effective way to get.
So how far behind are we on the, it's easier on the resurfacing when we see the streets on our communities not striped, we know what's going on. But what about the loops? How far behind are we on our loops?
On the resurfacing, we do try to keep up. We do use contractors to help supplement within our budget limit.
Not even just resurfacing, as you said, just all the loops. I mean, how are we?
Yeah, right now, I think this report was issued in August, and at that time, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I thought it was probably 3,500 or so loops that are backlogged citywide.
And is that in the, what is the acceptable range? How far out of the range are we, and what is the damage caused by being?
We want them all put back in, but there's only a loop. Typical loop to replace a loop is about $600 per loop. So, during the course of the fiscal year, we only have so much in our signal supply account that we just again try to prioritize by the cross streets that are triggering.
Are we? I don't have a sense of it. I mean, are we keeping up? Or
loops citywide, we have, I believe, 64,000 loops citywide, something to that effect. So,
I mean, every year we're having more and more loops that are not fixed, right? We're not keeping up with our.
No, we just like last year, we had over 5,000 that we repaired. Right now, we have over 3,000. So if you were to do the math, we'll probably get through all the loops, but each day something is happening and more loops. It's kind of a cat and mouse type of thing. But considering, these 3,000 or so that are outstanding now, we will get those done throughout the course of the year. But as others come up, again, we have to look at.
And use contractors for those.
No, we do most of them ourselves. We have a very limited amount for contractor, but we do supplement with contractor.
Mr. Englander?
Just a couple of things. I think, let me start off by saying the number one phone call that I consistently get in my office. When I say consistently, I don't mean those hot button issues that come up from time to time. But right now, it's billing issues with DWP. The phone's been ringing off the hook. But the most consistent, outside of those hot button issues and those flare-ups when there's particular issues, are streets, the conditions of our streets and our sidewalks throughout certainly my district, I think the entire city of LA. I've done a deep dive into this, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the research and homework and where I've looked at this, but one of my biggest frustrations is when you finally are able to secure some funding or get some additional streets paved or reconstructed or slurry sealed. Slurry's sort of automatic, and it's going to happen every nth year, 7th year usually anyway. But when you finally are able to secure some funds to get a street reconstructed or repaved, and it's not striped for 6 months, people are almost more upset that you actually had it fixed in the first place. And you get more phone calls on that particular street. Talk about no good deed goes unpunished. This is the worst bureaucratic inefficiency in the entire city of LA, bar none. The left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. The fact that you can sit here and tell us that it was one single part or an entire truck that was down for a year because we couldn't get the part is a pathetic excuse, quite frankly. It's ridiculous. And from a customer service perspective, from where we sit, to trying to fix this backlog of 90 years is what we've got in the city, and we can't even get our own internal city families to communicate on what should be striped and when, makes no sense at all. I don't put it on you. This is a system that you've inherited. This is a broken system of your bureaucracy that's been going on for decades, and it's only gotten worse. The fact that it can go 6 months and not pave streets, the fact that we don't have markouts, and markouts which can take months, and we've seen that as well, where you can actually pave a street and then not have any markouts on a street. Makes no sense. The fact that we only have one crew doing it. Where was the outcry from the department during the budget deliberations when we increased the amount of reconstructed streets we were going to do this year, saying, wait a minute, don't do this. We can't even keep up with what street service is doing for striping, let alone adding more. In fact, it was asked and answered by the different bureaus and the departments that you can put out that challenge and give us more money and we can do it. Well, we've never done it, and it's getting worse. Where's the written plan to fix it? I'm really puzzled, quite frankly, that we're sitting here and having these discussions. I'm sure you've got all the data to back it up, and you've done a great job in articulating that data. As has been stated by my colleagues, these aren't systems, these aren't pieces of equipment, this isn't technology that virtually every other city, not only in this country, but worldwide, is pretty much using that are fixing streets. This isn't something that was newly created or created by us. We've actually been on cutting edge to create systems and pieces of equipment like Cold in Place that nobody ever did, that does a phenomenal job. But that's not what we're talking about here. Where was the department during the budget deliberation saying, we've got a broken truck, it's been sitting for a year in a garage and we can't catch up, and you want to add more street reconstruction to this year's budget? We have a problem. It can't be done. They said the opposite. This is a crisis. It's a public safety crisis. One of the biggest issues that we face every day is a major gridlock transportation nightmare. When you've got broken streets, the people are paying for that. This is one of the highest cost cities to live in. And a lot of it's because of the conditions of our streets as well. On average, every Angelino is paying $832 for extraordinary maintenance of their vehicles, in tires, brakes, alignments, drums, rotors, not to mention depreciation of their cars. That's double the national average because our streets are in failed or poor condition. So when we finally get a dime to fix a street, we can't get it restriped. We've talked about in the past consolidating and merging the two different departments, or actually co-locating them to get them to communicate. Nothing, from my understanding, has ever transpired. I'm not putting this on you. This is my frustration over years in vetting what I see and the complaints that I get and the conversations that I have with all those who have sat there before you for years and years and years, and the conversations that I've had with the departments. I've seen it when my predecessor was the chair of Public Works, and I don't see a lot of changes in coordination, quite frankly. So I'm not trying to be scathing on this. I really don't want to put it on, it's not on your shoulders, and I've said that a few times, and I mean it. It's on all of our shoulders. I think everybody is to blame, but I'm not looking to blame. What do we do to get this fixed? How many trucks do you need to keep up with the amount of mileage you have now? What's the life expectancy of those? How many crews have to be out there to meet the obligation within 10 days? So if you have a 10-day goal and an objective for your matrix to get everything done, not on an average of 10 days, by the way, at a maximum of 10 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's correct.
Because an average of 10 days would be 20 days. Could be 1 day, and then some 20 days, and now we've met our metric. It should be, the goal is no longer than 10 days. What do we need to get there? What's the roadmap, if you will, for that? That's how many crews doing how much striping with how many trucks based on what you're given in the budget for how many streets are going to be reconstructed and repaired, plus the ones under construction, plus the ones that are on an urgency basis, all the ones with DWP and broken pipes and sewer systems, all those that also come up. We can sort of calculate for that now. We've got an idea of what we're going to go into next year and this current fiscal year with what that takes. So the key is, what are the numbers you need, and who's either A, failed to ask for it, or why hasn't it been given to the department? Because you can't give it to one department and give it to street services and say, you will and you shall fix so many streets a year, and then not give it to the back end to say you're going to put in so many switches and do so much striping and do the markouts, and not give it to your department. That makes no sense. It's better to do less mileage and get it all done right and effectively and efficiently. So I'd like to see everybody on the same page. I'm not sure, perhaps there'll be some recommendations out of this committee. I just wanted to share with you my thoughts on this.
So you've heard this sentiment expressed by, I think, probably 15 council members from time to time. It's universally a source of frustration, and I'm sure you're as frustrated as anybody. So I think it is time that we act to fix this. And as I said when we heard about it in T committee, I want to find a budget vehicle to remedy the deficiencies that we have. And so what I would recommend is that the analysis that you're already in the process of doing, of assessing what equipment purchases will be necessary and so on in order to meet the metrics that we're talking about, I'd like to have that reported back to this committee as soon as possible. Is it feasible to get that back to this committee in 60 days?
30 days.
30 days.
Thank
Done.
Mr.
Better
Chair,
still.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Would it? I would love to see, but not if it's going to slow this process down. In addition to what it would cost to get the metric of 10 days, what it would cost to get back to the metric what we used to have of 24 hours, because I suspect that it's probably I don't know, but probably marginal in terms of the difference once we're getting up to 10 days to just push the rest of the 24, get to that 24-hour thing. If it's not too difficult to add that on to the request, just for an analytic purposes, I'd like to know what that would cost as well. Could that also be done within the 30 days?
Yeah, what we can do is we can provide you a scale, what it'll show you if we did it at the 24 all the way to the 10 and just the different amount of resources for each.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be linear or not, but I suspect it won't be. But would love to.
It'll be fodder for a good discussion when it comes back here. So, so that's recommendation number one. Recommendation number two is that I think at minimum we should be beginning today the process of purchasing a new long striping truck to replace the one that has been sitting in the garage for a year, which should be cannibalized for its spare parts, I suppose. But we need to get that started right now. And if we can use MICLA to pay for it, we should use MICLA to pay for it. We should start that process immediately. And then when you come back, again, 30 days from now, let us know where we are in the process of procuring that truck. And then, or what else, I guess I should ask, whatever else you need from the council in order to begin that process, we can initiate that immediately. So do you need a direction to do that?
No, I think we're okay. I do appreciate the opportunity, and that's part of what this effort is about, to tell you truthfully what the situation is. I know over the years there's been a lot of lack of clarity on that issue, but we're here to tell you if the city intends to move at this pace and continue, and there is a priority for this, there's a lot at stake, and there's an investment that should be made.
Do you need further authorization to make the MICLA purchase of the truck?
Yes, we're going to need to work with the CAO and find out the appropriate directive to that. Or that can be an instruction for us to work with.
Then this committee, the recommendation of this committee will be to instruct the department and the CAO to work together to initiate that procurement of that long striping truck immediately. And I assume that your recommendations, when you come back here in 30 days, will include many other things that you'll need as well. But at bare minimum, we need to start that right away. And I'll come back, Mr. Bonin, with the third recommendation. But Mr. Englander, yes.
Just curious, and if you can come back and look at the possibility of even leasing. While that is going on, it could take 6 months or a year. As you said, it's got to be built. There's other companies that have them. They may not be utilizing them. We do that with aircraft in the fire department, possibly leasing to catch up on some of the backlog as well.
Okay. Yeah, and that report that we're going to expect in 30 days should also, that's a very good point, because to Mr. Bonin's point earlier, we have a systemic long-term issue to solve, but we also have an immediate short-term problem of backlog that can be dealt with from a variety of other ways, including possibly leasing, contracting, use of paint rather than thermoplastic, a number of different things to address that short-term backlog issue that we have. And then third, Mr. Bonnet.
And third, I'd like to instruct the department where feasible and resources are available to use paint to immediately do the striping near schools and senior centers in order to protect public safety and reduce our liability.
I did note in your report, and I appreciate, because this has been an issue that I've raised many times, the school issue. I appreciate that the report indicates that the department is coordinating, or is going to be coordinating, with street services to ensure that school schedules are taken into account when slurrying or resurfacing is done around schools, in order to be able to meet that, avoid that really critical problem when we have crosswalks that are eliminated during the school year next to schools. And so avoiding the problem in the first place is the first priority, and we certainly should be using paint or whatever else we can do to expedite the process.
And I do want to acknowledge Selwyn's work on this issue, as well as others in the department. I think coordination has improved a bit over the past few months. I think we still have a ways to go, but it's very difficult to coordinate the pacing of a truck that's moving 70 miles an hour with a tricycle. And I think in terms of funding, that's kind of what the comparison is between street services and DOT. So hopefully with this proposal, we'll know what the plan is, and then after that, the buck ends with us.
Okay. Anything further, members? Okay, Mr. McQuiston, you wanted to speak on this matter?
Jim McQuiston. You know, I'm quite surprised that this is DOT that's giving this report on something that says in the state Streets and Highways Code that only the superintendent of streets can work on a street. And I think that's probably part of the problem here. We let contractors work on the street and leave them in terrible condition, and that's why our streets are bad. And also, I cannot understand for the life of me why the striper is not a part of street services. I think that's the major fault in this. As far as Department of Transportation, they've got their hands full with ATSOC. Now, I called them up on Highway 2. There's a street, Santa Monica Boulevard, and there are two signals that are actually three signals that are a maximum of about 400 feet apart. And when one turns green, the other one turns red. It's impossible to get through all those signals. And I've called them up on this and nothing has happened. I think DOT must have its hands full that they can't manage the street signals. I think as far as striping streets are concerned, that obviously is something that street services should have. They should have those machines. And you know, street services can really outperform any other department here as far as getting things done. And I'm sure they could get the streets striped a lot faster. But from a technical standpoint, since we're using a thermoplastic, and I really think that that is what you want to use, you don't want to put another stripe down that's going to wreck the thermostat. That stuff has to be able to adhere very, very well. And if you put something else down underneath it, it's not going to adhere. So you don't want to do that. They do chalk the streets, and they do put dots down. But if they had that striper, street services could do it practically while they're paving.
All right. Very good. So without objection, the three recommendations that that we've stated will be the action of the committee. And I should note that if it's of any solace to the department, when I talked about the limited resource at a public meeting recently, at the limited resources that we have for striping, a representative of CHP was there and he said Caltrans has even less than we have to do freeways around here. So it's not a problem that's limited just to us, but it's a problem that we're
maybe they can loan us a machine that they're not using.
Yeah. Well, no, they have fewer machines. They have fewer crews. All right. That is the last item on our agenda. That brings us to general public comment. I have one card. That's Mr. McQuiston's. If you'd still like to be heard, Mr. McQuiston, on general public comment.
Jim McQuiston. When I walk out to my car, I can't remember if I locked my door. I can't remember what I wanted to talk about.
Okay. I have those days too, Mr. McQuiston. I know what you mean. All right. If there's no other action, if there's no other business before the committee, we are adjourned.